Ann Webster here, and as you know, for the past few days we have been discussing various chateaux of France. So today we are going to look specifically at the Louvre, and what we are going to focus on is not necessarily the art museum, which we will end with, but more of the progression from the very simple medieval keep to the massive structure that it is today. So, we're going to begin with this is an aerial view of the Louvre, and you can see here how absolutely massive it is. And it's got so many buildings and wings and additions. This just kind of helps just kind of explain what was built when. And then here is another view, and this is labeled more according to who is responsible for the building of the various annexes or courtyards. So, how did it start out? Well, obviously, it didn't start off as the massive structure that we know today. It was built in the 12th century by Philippe Auguste, and it was originally built as just a defense for Paris. It was very simple, very square, just a building with some towers, and it also served as a prison. Now we fast forward to Charles V, and he looked at it and said, well, it's a great location. It's in Paris, but it wasn't impressive enough to be a royal residence. So he started building a new addition, or an entirely new building, away from the original. And this part of the Louvre also included an immense library that he was famous for. And then during the Renaissance, and being true to a true Renaissance king, Francis I decided to tear down most of the original building and begin a completely new building in the Renaissance style. So he began to build the West Wing of the Louvre. Now, this continued under his son, who began work on a southern wing and also completed the West Wing that had been started by his father. Now, after the death of Henry II, his widow, Catherine de' Medici, was responsible for buying a huge portion of land next to the existing buildings of the Louvre. And what was strange was that she wanted to build an entirely different palace complex with huge gardens, but it was, well, as far as having separate palaces, it was actually relatively close, but it was quite a distance. It was close to half a kilometer away from the original buildings. But along with the building, she also bought land to complete gardens, which are now known as the Tuileries Gardens. But after she died, then of course construction stopped again and did not pick up until the reign of Henry IV. Now, Henry IV was responsible for what is called the Grand Design, which linked the buildings, the original buildings, and then the Renaissance building of Francis I, and the separate palace of Catherine de' Medici. So this was the structure that was, and then this was his planned addition. His son, Louis XIII, didn't really do much as far as adding on or building. He did extend the West Wing somewhat and also added this famous pavilion. And that's about it. So now we come to Louis XIV, and most people think of Louis XIV and they think right away of Versailles, which is true. It is what he was known for. But at the beginning of his reign, he did spend time and effort into adding on to and renovating the Louvre. He completed the North Wing, added to the Southern Wing, doubling its size, and he remodeled and finished the palace that began by Catherine de' Medici. Now, from Louis XIV to after the French Revolution, again, not much was done, but the colonnade, which is shown here, was restored, and a roof was added to the central pavilion and also to the northern and southern wings of the palace. So now we come to its beginnings as an art museum, which opened in 1793 under Napoleon I. And it, of course, was not the entire building complex. It was just a few rooms, but they were completely dedicated to art and were open to the public. And Napoleon I was also responsible for completing the wings that surrounded this huge central court. Now we come to Napoleon III, who completed the grand design that was first realized by Henry IV and built the Napoleon Court, which is shown here, which is where the famous glass pyramid stands. Now, when he started his renovations, he dubbed it the new Louvre. I know, incredibly original. But part of the reason why he did that was just to separate what had been done recently and what he was planning to do to the more medieval structure that had already been in place. So, which brings us to the Louvre today, because construction of the Louvre completely stopped in 1880. And since then, it's been more of renovation, restoration, redoing of the interior. But today, as the museum that we know, it has or displays a collection of over 35,000 works of art, which is only about a tenth of its entire collection. It actually contains or is home to more than 350,000 pieces, which of course are rotated. And it is more than 780,000 square feet, and that's just the space that's dedicated to the museum. The actual palace itself contains many more rooms and is much, much larger than that. So it gives you an idea of the vast size. Now here is another sort of aerial map of the Louvre, and the reason I did this was because, again, it really helps put things in perspective because of its just massive size and the fact that it was added to and redone and modified over almost 6 centuries. And there's so many courts and wings and things like that. It just kind of helps, if you look at the key that follows, exactly what was built when and who was responsible for it. So it just gives you more of a perspective. If you look here, beginning with Francis I in the Renaissance and ending in 1880. So I'm just going to leave you to read the activity. It's kind of self-explanatory. And then I believe that is it. And I hope you have enjoyed this presentation as much as I have. Ciao!